Is it coming out again?
They're mandating an STD vaccines. They want to give them to them at birth.
Whoa.
Hepatitis B.
Nah, because that's too much control over a person's body.
Right.
Especially when they've just been born, they've got no choice in it whatsoever.
Right.
It's bribery. It's enforced chemical slavery at the worst extent of the conspiratorial mindset, which I've got quite a lot of. Most of it turned out to be true. Yeah, it's totally wrong. It's like they can put anything in these vaccines to make you think or not think whatever they want you to think.
That's right.
That's the extreme end of it. Basically, it's about the choice. A parent should totally have choice over what happens to their child until the child voluntarily says, no thanks mum, no thanks dad, I want to do this instead, and they say, okay, you know, you're mature enough to make your own decisions, you do what you want to do. That's the way life goes. That's what parents are for, bringing up kids. It's not the government's fucking job to bring up kids. It's not their job. Straight away, to take away that choice the parents should have over what happens to their kids is fundamentally a basic freedom being taken away from all parents. And to say, if you don't do it, we're going to take away your social security money, your benefits to help you raise your kids, your child benefit, whatever you've got over here.
School.
Which is
public school.
Yeah. Well, that's just it's counterproductory for a start. If that's a word.
And I think they realize also it's a bullying maneuver. I think they know that a lot of parents, will give in and just vaccinate against their own wishes because they want their children to go to school and maybe can't afford to stay home with the child.
Well, exactly. Most people are in that position.
Right.
It's the very rich invent these ideas, and the nature of psychopathy is people who know about but have no connection to the emotional involvement that other people have when decisions are made that affect their lives. So they know about emotional states, they don't feel them, but they are clever enough to empathise with people to the point of getting what they want. But they will get things what they want, and in the path of destruction they create on their way to the top of whatever business or government department they're in, they don't really, they may know, but they don't care about the suffering that's left behind them.
Right.
The nature of what happens when they grab all the money and all the power at the top, they're taking it away from the bottom. It works. These people are psychopathic. They don't go around killing people like they do in the films, but they are psychopathic.
Yeah.
It's the very nature of cunning and arrogance and complete disregard for the emotional values that you would hope all humans have got, like empathy and kindness.
Yeah.
And those two things we need a whole lot more of. We have to not suffer in silence, but suffer out loud, and suffer less for being louder about it, and just more communication with people on that same being kind and nice and understanding of other people's situations and caring more about people who got less than we have. It all sounds very religious, but like, so what?
Yeah, so here's the thing. In 1986, under President Ronald Reagan, vaccine manufacturers and doctors were made liability free. And I just want you to think about, just take a moment and try to think of one other product, here in the US, where if that product injures or kills you, that you can't hold them legally accountable. And starting in 1986 under Reagan, vaccine manufacturers and doctors were made liability free. So you might say, well, what does it matter if they're liability free? Vaccines are safe and effective. That's what we've been told. But the reality is since I believe 1988, there's been a vaccine compensation program that's existed, and they've literally handed out billions of dollars in settlements to either injury or death claims related to vaccines. And I mean, again, try to think of a single product that has to have its own exclusive national court system set up exclusively for injuries and death caused by that product.
Let's get real. Does anyone ever ask why a perfect newborn needs a dozen shots before age 2? Why did the number of infant vaccines triple since the 80s, while rates of autism, allergies, diabetes, and asthma exploded?
But aren't these just coincidences? Isn't it genetics? Or better diagnosis? Or something?
Let's question the logic. Why give hepatitis B vaccine against drugs and STD to babies? Why so many combo shots? Sometimes 5 to 6 diseases at once? Why did Japan and Sweden see drops in SIDS and allergies after delaying or reducing vaccines? But the US and UK doubled down. Why is there a federal fund that's paid out almost $5 billion for vaccine injuries, but you never hear about it on TV?
What about stories the media never covers? Like Hannah Poling, a healthy toddler who developed seizures and lost speech right after 9 vaccines in one day. Her parents sued. The U.S. government admitted vaccines triggered her autism, paid millions, but doctors called it extremely rare. Are thousands of families just rare cases?
Here's what nobody asks. Why are pediatricians paid bonuses for every fully vaxxed child? Why are pharmaceutical companies protected from lawsuits? Why are some ingredients like aluminum, mercury, formaldehyde still used, even though all are neurotoxins? Why is questioning the schedule enough to get a doctor fired or banned from social media?
So what about recovery? Can we undo the damage?
Most real-life cases show heavy metals and toxins may take 5 to 10 years to clear, if ever. Neurological issues, like speech loss, tics, epilepsy, are rarely fully reversed. Some see improvements after years of therapy and clean living, but most families say, our child was never the same.
I'm not telling you what to do, but you deserve answers. Why are so many coincidences brushed off while parents are blamed, doctors are silenced, and pharma profits keep rising?
262 children who had ADHD in the vaccinated group. Amongst the unvaccinated group, there were 0 cases of ADHD. 0.
These ones are just mind-boggling. These conditions were not found at all in almost 2,000 unvaccinated kids. 0 brain dysfunction, 0 diabetes, 0 behavioral problems, 0 learning disabilities, 0 intellectual disabilities, 0 tics, and 0 other psychological disabilities in the unvaccinated.
Despite this, and in contrast to our expectations, again, the author's expectations was they'd conduct the study and probably find vaccinated people a whole lot healthier than the unvaccinated, right? This is what we found. We found that exposure to vaccination was independently associated with an overall 2.5-fold increase in the likelihood of developing a chronic health condition when compared to children unexposed to vaccination.
Despite the good intentions of the field of vaccinology, that is backfiring on us.
I never learned in medical school how vaccines were studied, what type of clinical trials they went through, how they evaluated adverse reactions, how they even evaluated effectiveness. So after Victoria died, I started reading everything that is put out there. Anything that would lead me to a topic, then I would Google that topic, and if there were textbooks in relation to that topic, I would order them, and then based on reading that book, I would order another book. What I have learned has shocked me. There has been information out there since the smallpox vaccine was created, linking vaccinations to encephalitis, which is inflammation of the brain, which can cause death or permanent neurological disability. I've learned recently the placebo in a vaccine trial can actually be the aluminum or the mercury or another vaccine. I would assume the placebo was normal saline, which would be like water, something not harmful. In accredited, peer-reviewed medical literature, they have linked vaccinations to chronic autoimmune problems. The science is out there. People are just choosing not to look at it.
What kind of doctor are you? I'm an emergency room physician, and I've seen a lot of kids that's come in after having vaccines that's had seizures, and even to the point I believe that sudden infant death syndrome has been misdiagnosed, and I think it's probably vaccine injury in some cases. And to shift gears to the point that not really thinking that the vaccine was causing it, now listening to her, and she's brought all this to my attention, and doing some research myself, and finally thinking that this could actually be vaccines that's doing all this. And then calling the pediatrician and saying, look, you know, got this kid in here, you just gave him shots, you know, the other day, and they're having seizures, and obviously it's a vaccine that's causing it, and just having a total denial from that end of it, from the pediatrician side. And I've seen that happen over and over again. In fact, one of our colleagues who now works in the emergency room as a certified he was a neonatologist, and his son actually had a vaccine injury, and he totally denies the fact that it was a vaccine injury, even though it happened right afterwards. The child now has a form of what he thinks is like cerebral palsy, but I'm sure it's a vaccine injury. And I've spoken to him about it, and he's still in total denial.
So as a doctor, why do you think the pediatricians behave like that?
Well, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, it's a huge part of their income. I mean, and plus, I think the medical community as a whole is kind of just ignorant. I mean, I don't think they want to hear this. They believe in people like the CDC, and when you start realizing that you can't believe those people anymore, it causes a huge problem for you in your practice. I mean, it has for me, even when I start thinking about vaccines. That's just a little part for me because I don't give a lot of vaccines. It certainly has changed the way I give Tdap, because I don't give Tdap to hardly anyone. In fact, I haven't given it in years now. When you start looking at the incidence of tetanus and how many people actually get tetanus, it's ridiculous. They give everybody that comes in, even with a corneal abrasion. I don't think there's even been a case of a corneal abrasion causing tetanus in the last 100 years, but yet the hospital wants you to give Tdap to people that have a corneal abrasion.
And here's my husband. He refuses to take a flu vaccine. I mean, he's required as a physician.
So what happens when you refuse to take a flu vaccine? I thought it was mandatory.
Oh, this is so funny. Tell them about last year when you had to wear a mask.
The hospital required us to have anyone that didn't get a vaccine were marked, so to speak, by wearing a mask. And I just basically refused to wear the mask. And I told them that I felt like if I was going to wear the mask, it was to protect me from the people that got the vaccine.
Yeah, from the shedding.
And in fact, I said if that's true, and the healthcare providers that are being required to wear a mask, why isn't it that the family members that come in here aren't all required to wear a mask as well? Because we don't know which ones of those have gotten the flu vaccine when they come into the hospital.
And the fact that the flu vaccine was found 0% effective.
Well,
and they were acting like they were being somewhat
when they came
immune.
out and said that I think it was 2 years ago, the strains that they had given everybody was like, I think it was at the best was 30-40%, and that's their numbers, which is probably more like 5 or 10% effective. I said at that point in time, why isn't everyone wearing a mask? If that's true, because the vaccine was not effective.
Are there other doctors that refuse vaccines and believe the same?
There are some that do that. Most of them just fall in line with the rest of the herd, so to speak. I don't do that anymore. I won't do it. And so I told them they either have to fire me or I just find another job somewhere, because I'm not going to wear a mask, first of all, and second, I'm not going to get a vaccine. And I work in emergency medicine. I'm around the flu all the time. Do I ever get the flu? No. Why don't I ever get the flu? It's not because I don't get a vaccine. No, I think it's because I have a healthy gut. I take care of it. I take probiotics. I mean, I do things to
how many gastroenterologists don't even know about a probiotic?
Oh, yeah, that's true, too. I mean, it's amazing. If you're in emergency medicine, you go in and you find a patient that a gastroenterologist is taking care of, and they're not even on probiotics. I'm thinking, what is...
When you were at medical school, how much did you get taught about vaccines?
Very little. Very little. And what you got basically was told, these are the things that you need to give to your patients.
So it's all about giving it to
This is the schedule. I mean, yeah, you learn about adjuvants and you learn about the immune system and how it works, but as far as what the vaccine actually does, and you never heard about the negative effect of a vaccine. Never.
And this is my question, is let's talk about adjuvants. Let's talk about the unnatural way that you assault the system with an adjuvant like peanut oil. My son has a peanut, the allergy that he could die from a peanut, and I truly believe it's from an adjuvant they used in a vaccine.
Yeah, we did some study on that, and I think it was called adjuvant 19 or something like, or 16 or 19. I'm not sure which it is now, but it was made from peanut oil, and it was put into the vaccine as an adjuvant to help to make it work better. Yeah. But obviously, when a child is given, an injection of peanut oil, it doesn't go through the gut the way it normally is supposed to, the way God intended it, then obviously it can have all kinds of negative effects. I think that has caused some of this.
So what did you think of the film, Vax?
What did I think of it? I mean, it certainly reinforced a lot of the things that we've been studying and my wife has been bringing to my attention. I mean, it's caused a huge dilemma for me, obviously, in the medical field, because now I'm starting to question a lot of the things that we were taught in medical school, first of all. And then secondly, it's also starting to just make me wonder about the CDC, all the people that send all the information to the physicians. Certainly, I think the pharmaceuticals are heavily involved in the medical education portion of what we get, and it causes a problem. I mean, I'm shifted gears a lot. I think medicine is for emergencies mainly. I work in emergency medicine, so that's the only reason I can continue my career. If I was a pediatrician and I saw the film, I'd probably want to I'd get the heck out of it.
Right, they do tend to walk out.
Yeah, I'd get another one.
Vaccine injury is real. We were told it was genetic, and then we were told by geneticists that there's no possible way 3 children would shut off on the same day. That was absolutely statistically impossible, especially being 2 boys and 1 girl. We went in at 10 a.m. for the shot. My daughter still has the mark on her leg from the shot. She was the first one to get it, and she screamed and never really stopped screaming after that. It was as if she was blind and deaf and complete failure to thrive, from super happy smiley girl to this is a picture of her. She had full-blown eye contact. She was super lovely, and she shut right down, and all she did at that moment was stare at the ceiling fan. So that was at noon. We had the shot at 10 a.m. 2 o'clock, we watched Richie shut off. All his raspberry blowing and mama dada and the furniture walking and everything, they just shut off. All the giggles. They lost all their reflexes. They stopped blinking, stopped yawning, stopped coughing, stopped sneezing. They lost their startle reflex. So that was 2 o'clock. We watched Richie shut down. The worst is when we saw the final one shut down. Robbie looked like he was hit by a bus. Robbie, from that moment on, had a stunned look on his face. He lost his happiness. This is a first year picture? First birthday.
3 months after the shot.
3 months after the shot. They were no longer engaged in anything or anyone. They lost their smiles. They never held hands again. They never looked at each other again.
But to get started, why am I here? I wouldn't be here if we had the healthiest kids in the world. I don't think that there would be any argument. People say you're crazy to argue vaccines have made us so healthy. Really? Look at this headline. This was out of 2000. This happened in 2013. U.S. has highest first-day infant mortality out of industrialized world, group reports. In fact, it went on to say, we have more babies die on the first day of life in the United States of America. We have 50% more die on the first day of life than every other industrialized nation combined. We cannot keep a day 1 old baby alive. Think about that. How does that make any sense? Do we not have the best doctors in the world? Do we not have the best hospitals in the world? Something's wrong if you're like, well, that's 2013. No one's ever really said the stats gotten better. And then this came out just 3 weeks ago. American kids are 70% more likely to die before adulthood than kids in other rich countries. The opening sentence, a new study ranks 20 wealthy countries on childhood deaths. The U.S. comes in last. There are 20 countries that have as much money or less than we do, and their children are healthier and not dying at 70. Look at that, 70% more likely to die. I mean, it makes no sense. So I always say, I'm not a doctor. I'm just a journalist. I investigate things that don't make sense to me, and then I get into it. How is this possible? If vaccines have made us so healthy, why are our children dying? And people say, well, how do you know it's vaccines that are the problem? Maybe it's food, maybe it's water, maybe it's air. Okay, we could talk about that too. I'm sure people here at this conference will be talking about that. But the problem is why isn't our news talking about these numbers? If it is food, why isn't Sanjay Gupta talking about it? If it is water, why isn't, Rachel Maddow complaining about it? Why is no one talking about the fact that our children are dying at alarming rates in what is supposed to be the most advanced, greatest country on earth? All right, let me start with, this is how the program started at National Institute of Health. This is a study that was done last year, 2017. It came out. One of the big arguments we make about determining whether vaccines are causing the issues we see in society or not is the vax versus unvax study. We feel like if you just took the databases we are sitting on at our National Institutes of Health and CDC and ran all of the unvaccinated children against the vaccinated children and say, what are the health outcomes? Is there higher rates of cancer than the vaccinated? Is there higher autism? Is there higher multiple sclerosis? The list goes on and on. It's the simplest study known to man. Well, they have refused to do that for decades, but this guy, Peter Aabe, is a doctor who is the head of our vaccine program in third world countries. I don't know if he's the head, but he's deeply involved, has been vaccinating third world nations for decades. He decided just this year to look back 30 years at a DTP program, the diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis vaccine. The reason being, he was looking through the numbers and saw that because of the way that they had rolled out that vaccine program for kids 3 to 6 months old, they were so specific about the age and then the towns that they could get to and how they could get to them, that he said, oh my God, I have a perfect control study. I have half the children 3 to 6 months old got the DTP vaccine in Guinea-Bissau, Africa, and half did not. And I can compare these two groups. Well, what he discovered when he compared them was DTP was associated with a 5-fold higher mortality than being unvaccinated. All currently available evidence suggests that DTP vaccine may kill more children from other causes than it saves from diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis, meaning the deaths were not tetanus, they were not diphtheria or pertussis, they were dying of other things. Malaria, dysentery, things that they would normally be able to fight off. And the conclusion was, perhaps this vaccine is efficacious when it comes to diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis, but it's hurting the immune system to fight off other issues. In fact, the numbers got worse. It was 5-fold when they got the oral polio at the same time. When they just got diphtheria by itself, DTP by itself, 10 times the rate of death. 10 times the rate of death. That's murder, really, accidental murder. Now, I want to remind you that this vaccine we used to use in America, but we've discontinued it. We now use DTaP because there were so many lawsuits against the pharmaceutical industry for the wholesale pertussis, the DTP vaccine. We switched over in the 90s. And so we don't use this vaccine anymore, but we use it all over the third world. Our question to the National Institute of Health after showing this is this. Had we not looked back 30 years, we wouldn't know that this vaccine is killing children. Our concern is that in America, we are giving 72 vaccines, 16 different vaccines over 72 doses to be specific, to our children by the time they're 18. What surveillance system is in place to capture if one of our vaccines is destroying immune systems like this one apparently is? Or the combination of our vaccines. Are our health institutions really monitoring how vaccines are working in society or not? That's our question. And what we pointed out, we said to them right up front, I think you're going to be alarmed to find that the conflicts of interest and the type of science being done leaves us with a really terrifying notion that we have nothing in place to see if this isn't happening in America. All right. Now, these are just a short list of vaccine adverse events that we essentially admit to on one way or another. Vaccine court has paid out for Guillain-Barré syndrome and transverse myelitis, which are both paralytic diseases. We say we've eradicated polio. Those used to be considered polio, by the way, until we got better diagnosis. So that can paralyze you. Encephalopathy, seizure disorders, chronic inflammatory demyelinating diseases, rheumatoid arthritis. And then below, this is the list of vaccine insert side effects. So this is on the insert wrapped around the vaccine itself. Things like rheumatoid arthritis, tics, speech delays. You know, this is just, we just sort of went for the smallest, most effective versions of this, but the list goes on and on and on. Okay, here's where we're at in America. 1 in 6 children now has a developmental disability. ADD, ADHD, autism, hearing loss, mental disability, seizures, stammering. It's a terrible number. That is not the way it was when we were kids. And look at this, 54% of children in America now have a chronic illness, either an autoimmune disease or a neurological disorder, anxiety problems, asthma, bone and muscle disorders, chronic ear infections, diabetes. You've seen it. I'm not making this up. If you're taking your kid to school, or if you're a teacher that's been teaching for the last 20 or 30 years, you've watched the health of your children in school just plummet through the floor. ADD, ADHD, 1 in 4 kids in our school system is going to leave school on a drug they'll be on the rest of their lives. Okay, this is alarming. So, what is an autoimmune disease, since that seems to be what's running rampant? 54% of children essentially have an autoimmune disease, a disease resulting from a disordered immune reaction in which antibodies are produced against one's own tissues, has systemic lupus, erythematosus or rheumatoid arthritis, multiple sclerosis, even asthma. The list goes on and on of autoimmune disease. Why would our bodies be attacking themselves all of a sudden? Why wasn't this the case when you talk to grandma and grandpa, like, I never heard of such a thing? Why now does 1 in 2 kids have their bodies attacking themselves? Now again, people will say, well, Del, it could be water, it could be air, it could be food, it could be vaccines, it could be a combination of all these things. Sure. But I want to say this. If what's happening is our immune system is confused and attacking our own cells, wouldn't it be wise to really investigate the one product that is designed to alter your immune system for life? That's what you do when you take a vaccine. You are trying to trick your body into thinking it's had a disease. Is it really that outrageous to think that somewhere in tricking your body to think it's had a disease that did not come fully in contact with, it gets confused and starts fighting the wrong parts of your body? It's a very layman's perspective, and doctors say, well, that's preposterous. Really? Is it preposterous? Certainly. It should have enough logic to it that we investigate it deeply and thoroughly over all other things when we're talking about autoimmune disease. Here's the numbers. In 1986, we got 11 vaccines. Then we passed the 1986 Compensation Act, and we went to 53 vaccines now, and as I said, 72 doses. But look at this. Same time, 12.8% chronic illness, developmental disabilities in 1986, 54% now in 2017. Now, yes, it's anecdotal, but those are coterminous. They run exactly right next to each other when we look at the health outcomes of our children. And yet we still want to listen to news anchors that say it really isn't vaccines, or our doctors when we say it isn't vaccines. My question is, how did you prove that? How do you know for sure it's not vaccines? Okay, well, who is responsible for vaccine safety? This is where this issue begins. Any other product, if your airbag fails, we watch Toyota recall millions of cars. A car seat fails, we recall millions of car seats. In this case, Merck, if you don't remember, Merck made Vioxx. It caused heart attacks. They knew it. They had hid it from the FDA. They put out a drug they knew caused heart attacks, and 65,000 people or more were killed by that drug. They settled for $3 billion in a lawsuit. I'm amazed at any company that knowingly murders American citizens, more American citizens, by the way, than were killed in the Vietnam War. I'm amazed that company can even work in America ever again. But they happen to make most of your childhood vaccines. This wonderful, beautiful company that in this court case had emails that said inside of them, when doctors were beginning to question why their patients were having heart attacks, Merck put out an email to all their marketing agents saying, don't worry, any doctor that questions the safety of Vioxx, we will hunt them down and destroy them where they live. That was a quote, came out in court, internal email. That's how that company thinks of citizens. And that company, as I said, makes your childhood vaccines. I hope you feel good, because that's who's supposed to be in charge of safety until this happened. The 1986 Vaccine Injury Compensation Act. Essentially, as I said, DTP was causing so many lawsuits. The manufacturers are saying we can't make money from vaccines anymore. And I don't want to just put it all on the pharmaceutical industry. There were also parents of injured children that wanted to see some way that we could have a court system that would pay out easier so that they didn't have to try and sue a multi-billion-dollar industry and go through appeals processes. So the government and Ronald Reagan signed this act reticently. He was really nervous about the dangers of taking all liability away from a company that injects products into our babies. But he did it. And so what was the consequence of that? All of a sudden, overnight, there was no incentive to conduct safety studies by the manufacturers. In fact, there was a disincentive because in the 86 Act, the only way you can sue and get outside of this law is if they recognize an adverse event that they do not report. So think about that. If you're a company, you say, okay, well, hold on a second. So if we do safety studies and find that we have an adverse event and we don't report it, we can be sued. If we don't do any safety studies at all and just put this on the market, we are free and clear from liability? That's right. Who thought of that? Think about how dangerous that is. So once you're free from liability, you have 78 million American children. As soon as you get your vaccine put on the childhood schedule, 78 million customers automatically overnight because of our mandating laws. I don't know how many of you are entrepreneurs or create some sort of product. Can you imagine being able to lobby the government to force your product in the hands of every child in America? I mean, Cabbage Patch dolls, they would have ruled the world. Okay. And obviously there's a strong incentive to do what? Develop more vaccines because it's become so financially viable. You can't get sued. You don't have to advertise because the government's going to force them onto people. And so what happens? There we are, 11 vaccines in 1986. This is what it looks like now in 2017. And by the way, there's 270 vaccines in the pipeline you haven't heard about yet, and thousands of vaccine trials going on as we speak. I'm here to tell you this is the future of the pharmaceutical industry for all the reasons I've said. It's the most profitable product the pharmaceutical industry has. You can sue for Vioxx, you can sue for OxyContin, but you can't sue for vaccines, and you don't even have to advertise. And, by the way, the pharmaceutical industry is the #1 most powerful lobby in Washington today as we speak. They are outspending oil and gas 2 to 1. Wrap your head around that. Why does the pharmaceutical industry need to be buying politicians at the rate of 2 to 1 over energy? Where are they going? Do you think they're trying to push a drug? Or maybe, just maybe, they really like their product that they can force onto schedules and mandate them for the American population. If you go to Health and Human Services website, you will find this is not just about kids. They have something called Healthy People 2020. And the goal was by 2020 to have a mandatory vaccine program for all adults too. That's where the money is. When you investigate a story as a journalist, what's the one question you always ask, or as a lawyer? Follow the money. Where does the money go? This whole push to mandate vaccines in children, the flu and the scare and the measles outbreaks, it's not about trying to get 2% of these kids vaccinated that aren't vaccinating. That's not worth anything. It's about 320 million Americans being turned into human ATM machines for the pharmaceutical industry. That's where this is going. And so who is going to deal with this? When this is what our schedule ends up being, because these people will vaccinate for every microbe and piece of flint or fleck on the planet if they can, who is going to test all of these for safety before they hit the market? Who's in charge of that? Health and Human Services. This is how this works. The 1986 Act takes all liability away from the industry, puts it on Health and Human Services, which oversees FDA, CDC, HRSA, and NIH. Now let's talk about how well that's being done and the conflicts of interest. There's a major conflict of interest right up at the bat, which is obvious to anyone that looks at it. You have a problem because Health and Human Services, through the CDC, their primary objective is to stop infectious disease. It's a noble objective. I am not putting that down. But they have to promote vaccines and they have to distribute vaccines because vaccines is the only way our scientific community right now thinks you stop. That's the only way you can stop infectious disease. That's their primary goal. But then you hand them the job of testing these products for safety. Well, look at the problem. If you've seen Vaxxed, you see exactly what happened. How do you promote a product to millions of people? In fact, they buy $5 billion worth of vaccines to distribute. How do you do that and then do a safety test that finds, oh my goodness, one of these is really dangerous, is hurting children? If they publicize that, they're terrified that their primary objective of getting you to use a vaccine will go down. And there is the ultimate conflict of interest. But it gets worse. Okay. How does FDA assess the safety of vaccines? If you go to the website, this is what it says. Vaccines undergo rigorous and extensive testing to determine their safety and effectiveness. Okay, that is true for drugs. How did that mean? If you look at drugs, this is how a drug is approved. Lipitor had a 4.8-year safety review period with a placebo group. The scientific method for achieving safety in a product that's injected or swallowed is to have a double-blind placebo study, an inert placebo. One group gets Lipitor, the other group gets a sugar pill that's painted just like Lipitor. Neither the scientists nor the people involved in the study know which one they're getting. Then at the end of the 4.8 years, they put it all on a graph on a computer. We find out what were the rates of cancer, what were the rates of autoimmune disease, all the different types of questions we have, and then it's unmasked. And then the scientists and everybody finds out, did the drug perform as safely as the inert placebo? You all had some sense of that if you went to high school science. That's how it's done, okay? It's obvious. Enbrel, same thing, 6.6 years. That got a saline injection. Now here's the question. Wouldn't you assume vaccines are going through this exact same process? Because I know I did. I know when I worked on the doctor's television show and people said vaccines are dangerous, I was like, well, yeah, sometimes things like Vioxx slip through, but I'm not seeing some big lawsuit or something outing vaccines. Certainly they're going through this process. Take a look at this. This is the hepatitis B vaccine that's given on the first day of life. Hello, welcome to the world. You're gasping for your first breath, and we're going to give you your first sexually transmitted disease called hepatitis B. By the way, just like AIDS, is not, the only way you contract it is sharing needles or being sexually active with prostitutes or promiscuous sexual behavior. I don't know how you plan on raising your one-day-old infant, but hopefully there's going to be a long time before this vaccine is even needed. But look at this safety review period. This comes right off of the vaccine insert itself. I'm not making this up. 4 days. They injected the children, and then 4 days, they look good, put this on the market. The other product, so that was GlaxoSmithKline's, Merck, 5 days. And was there a placebo group? No. No inert placebo to test against to see, anything. They just put this right on the market into day one old babies. I don't know how many of you have babies, but that is the most fragile human alive. And remember what I said at the top? We have more babies die on the first day of life than every other industrialized nation combined. You know what they don't do? They don't give their babies hepatitis B vaccines on day one. And look at this. Polio. 48-hour review period, and this is great. This is another trick they do. Oh, we do placebo studies. The placebo group got the DTP vaccine. The deadly vaccine that's killing 10 times the amount of kids in Africa was how we approved the polio vaccine. One group got the polio vaccine and the other group got DTP. They seem to have about the same amount of adverse events and risk profile. Polio looks good, put it on the market. You can't make this stuff up, and it goes on and on and on this way. We literally said to the heads of National Institute of Health, CDC, HHS, are we missing something? Is there somewhere where a real inert placebo study is being done in a file, in a computer system we don't have access to? Because we believe we'd like to see that. And they hemmed and they hawed and they sort of shuffled in their chairs, and eventually they said, no. No what? No, you're not going to show us? Or no, you don't use the scientific method to approve vaccines for safety? No, we don't use placebo-based studies. Why? This is what they said. Because it would be unethical. That's right. Unethical because we believe vaccines are so fantastic. Even a brand new one before it's ever come onto the market, like HPV, we're going to try and fight cancer, cervical cancer with a vaccine. It's so fantastic, even before we get to a safety trial, that to have a group of children go through a placebo group for 3 or 4 years would be a disservice to them not getting this great new product. Therefore, we don't test them. There it is. Now, you can question that science, and you can ask whether you think that's good science or not. But here's what just happened. Our top health agencies in the United States of America just admitted to me, Robert Kennedy Jr., and 10 other people on our team, we have never done a vaccine safety study before we put it on the market. That's it. Whatever you want to call it, unethical or not, you now know your children are part of one of the greatest human experiments in the history of man. Okay, so here's how the process works. In order for a vaccine to be approved, it has to go through the FDA. That group is called the Vaccine and Related Biological Products Advisory Committee. In 2000, the Congress investigated VRBAC is what it's called. And this is what they found. The overwhelming majority of members, both voting members and consultants, have substantial ties to the pharmaceutical industry. And committee members with substantial ties to pharmaceutical companies have been given waivers to participate in committee proceedings. What types of waivers? Look at this. For instance, 3 out of the 5 FDA advisory committee members who voted to approve the rotavirus vaccine in 1997 had financial ties to the pharmaceutical companies that were doing what? Developing different versions of the rotavirus vaccine. You had people voting to approve rotavirus to be added to the childhood schedule that were in development with their own rotavirus vaccine. One of the 5 voting members had a $10 million contract for a rotavirus vaccine, and one was the principal investigator for a Merck grant to develop what? A rotavirus vaccine. These are the people that were voting, saying, yes, your children need this because we are going to make billions of dollars. Can you think of a greater conflict of interest? I can't. Okay. So once it gets out of the FDA, it goes to ACIP, the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices. So the FDA just approved it for the market, and now we're going to put it onto the childhood schedule officially, and we want ACIP to weigh in on this. Same thing, but think about this vote, mandating it to millions. Once you get this vote, once it goes through this committee, millions, 78 million children are now going to be forced to use your product, okay? You have immunity from liability. This is where your immunity comes. Once it lands on the schedule, now you're free from liability. You never have to worry about it again. You're included in the Vaccine for Children program, which even pays you when children are too poor to have the vaccine. The government's going to make sure you get paid for every single one of your product that goes out the door. All right. And once again, in the investigation, CDC grants blanket waivers to the ACIP members, regardless of their conflicts. The ACIP reflects a system where government officials make crucial decisions affecting American children without the advice and consent of the governed. Same thing, they went through a list of systematic lack of oversight. 97% of the committee members had not even filled out their conflict disclosures part of the paper when they took the job. And then 58% still had unidentified potential conflicts. 32 had, even when they looked into it, had 32 conflicts that were unresolved. Basically, you have the pharmaceutical industry sitting in this pseudo board, acting like it's there for your safety, voting their own products into your children. Their own unsafety tested products into your kids. Here's how the finances break down. CDC gets an $11.5 billion with a B dollar budget. They buy $4.9 billion worth of vaccines, which they distribute all over the country. They're a marketing arm for the pharmaceutical industry. They also, by the way, own over 20 patents in many of your childhood vaccines now, so they make money off of every sale of a vaccine. Still want to have CDC in charge of your safety? Because if they find a problem with a vaccine their own patent is in, do you think they're going to tell you about it? All right. And then you've got the revolving door. If you watched Vax, you know that Julie Gerberding was the head of the CDC at the same time that this MMR study that proves to be a fraud looking at MMR and autism, that was a Merck product. Julie Gerberding oversaw this study, which basically kicked kids off of the study, manipulated the study, committed a complete and total scientific fraud. And what happened with her after that? She goes on to work for Merck as president of the vaccine department at $2.5 million salary. Congratulations, job well done, Julie. You exonerated Merck's products, and now you're the head of their company. Okay. Let's talk about vaccine court for a second. I know I'm dumping a lot on you, but people will always say, well, where's your data? Where's your proof? I'm laying the data on you. And at the end, I will give you a text message that you can send, and you can bring this home, and you can look it over. We cite everything. I'm not making this up. This is all their own published studies, journals. All of this is public record. Okay, so the Vaccine Injury Compensation Program, this is how this court system works. There is no judge, there is no jury, the press is not allowed, and all filings are submitted under seal. You must fight against HHS. Now, I want you to think about this. This really just hit me this year. So you used to sue Merck when your child got seizures or died after a vaccine. Now, when you have to sue for a vaccine injury, you're suing the Secretary of Health and Human Services. You're suing the government of the United States. You have to fight the government to say, my child's been injured by a vaccine. And who do they use to fight back? The Department of Justice lawyers. Think about how corrupt this is. Department of Justice usually is there to fight for the citizens of a country against industries and manufacturers that break laws or break rules and put us in harm's way. But in this situation, it's turned completely on its head, and now they fight you to prove you're crazy, you're lying, the vaccine did not cause your child or your injury. Incredible. And you must fight without discovery. You're not allowed to ask to see the safety trials that we've been looking for. You're not allowed to ask Merck, how did this product get made? What happened with it? None of that's available to you. Would be available in a regular court, but not for you. And this is the best part. They don't have to prove that the injury was not caused by the vaccine. You have to prove that the injury was caused by the vaccine. You being what? I mean, maybe you work in retail or you sell cars or insurance. How are you supposed to know what the science is that caused what happened right before your eyes? Your child got a vaccine and then stopped talking 3 days later, stopped walking, never was the same person again. It is upon you to prove that that was caused by the vaccine. And how? The only thing they will accept is science. You have to find scientific studies that show that the vaccine causes this injury. And who was supposed to have done those studies for you? Health and Human Services, because they're the ones responsible for safety now. The very person you're suing, the group you're suing, is the one that was supposed to have done the safety science, so you never had to be in this courtroom to begin with. In fact, it's like this. It's a murder trial where the murderer is the one doing all of the forensics. And under those unbelievably extreme circumstances, we've still paid out $3.7 billion in injuries to vaccine injury, and that is with a cap of $250,000 for pain, suffering, and death. Okay, so if you saw Vaxxed, you remember that William Thompson came forward. He was recorded in several phone calls, over 4 hours of material. He also presented Congressman Bill Posey with 10,000 documents to back up his claim. This was not some guy who was just had an axe to grind and making something up. He backed it up with real data, 10,000 pages. He gave to Congressman Bill Posey, and Congressman Bill Posey stood before our Congress and said this.
In August 2014, Dr. William Thompson, a senior scientist at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, worked with a whistleblower attorney to provide my office with documents related to a 2004 CDC study that examined the possibility of a relationship between mumps, measles, rubella vaccines, and autism. In a statement released in August 2014, Dr. Thompson stated, "I regret that my co-authors and I omitted statistically significant information in our 2004 article published in the Journal of Pediatrics. The co-authors scheduled a meeting to destroy documents related to the study. The remaining 4 co-authors all met and brought a big garbage can into the meeting room and reviewed and went through all the hard copy documents that we had thought we should discard and put them in a huge garbage can. However, because I assumed it was illegal and would violate both FOIA and DOJ requests, I kept hard copies of all documents in my office, and I retained all associated computer files."
Destroyed documents. You've heard that before. William Thompson has them. He's given them to a sitting congressman. That congressman stood before our own Congress. And at the end of this says, the American people trust us with the safety and health of their children. Please, please, I beg, I implore you, we must subpoena Dr. William Thompson. That has not happened. It's been almost 3 years. Our government does not want to talk to Dr. William Thompson, who, by the way, still works at the CDC, still considered to be one of our greatest vaccine scientists of all times. So he hasn't lost his mind. They haven't kicked him out. He's still protected by whistleblower status, and no one in our government seems to care. Just so you get a sense of it, here's just a little bit of what was recorded of Thompson and his thoughts. By the way, This is the statistician. When they're doing a study like the MMR vaccine study, there's 5 people on that team. He's the mathematician. He's the one that sits with the computer and has to graph it all out. This is the most important guy. You know, as you would say, if you were busting the mob, this was the guy that had all the numbers. Okay? He has the numbers, and this is what he had to say.
I shoulder that the CDC has put the research 10 years behind, all right? Because the CDC has not been transparent, we've missed 10 years of research because the CDC is so paralyzed right now by anything related to autism.
Right.
They're not doing what they should be doing because
Right.
they're afraid to look for things that might be associated. When I talk to you, you have a son with autism, and I have great shame now when I meet families with kids with autism because I have been part of the problem. So there's less and less and less being done as the place just comes to a grinding halt.
There it is. I want to give a shout out to Brian Hooker, who is the scientist on the other side of that phone call and decided to start recording these statements. By the way, people say, wow, it was recorded without him knowing it? Yeah. Well, doesn't that make that, illegal? Brian Hooker actually investigated and found out he lives in California, which is a 2-party state, so both parties on the phone have to know they're being recorded. But he lives in Redding, California, 3 hours from Oregon, where it's a 1-party state. So he drove to Oregon every time he recorded these phone calls. But I want you to think about this. Thompson didn't know he was being recorded. This is not a man that stepped forward looking for some salary bonus or to get even with somebody. He was confessing his soul on a phone, thinking that it was private. That makes him, I think, the most credible whistleblower we may have ever seen. Okay. So you get it. We're incentivizing the industry to not do proper safety testing. The regulatory agencies are likewise incentivized to not do testing because it'll be used against them in court. And so our regulatory function has been subsumed to promoting, distributing, and defending vaccines, and no one is looking at safety. Okay, so we've talked about pre-licensing safety studies. What safety studies are being done? None to put it onto the market. So we asked this. Since clearly it's, unethical to do the appropriate studies to determine safety, how are you monitoring the safety of vaccines once we are experimenting on our population, when we're giving them to kids? What program is in place? Okay? We only have one program in place, and this is it. It's called the VAERS system, the Vaccine Adverse Events Reporting System. If you go to your pediatrician, your child gets a vaccine, they start having seizures the next day, you bring them in, that doctor is supposed to report those seizures to VAERS. If your child dies 4 days after a vaccine, that doctor is supposed to report that to VAERS. Well, look at 2016. Here's the amount of VAERS reports we have, 59,117. I think for most people, that's a far cry higher than you thought it was to begin with. We're told vaccine injuries are 1 in a million. There's not 59,000 million people living in America, so something's wrong. 432 deaths, 1,000 permanent disabilities, lifelong permanent disabilities, 10,000 emergency room visits. Those numbers are horrific. And how does a government force you to use a product with this type of safety rating? They know some people, they're going to murder innocent children this year. They know it. They can't avoid it. They're going to create a catastrophic, mental or brain swelling for certain kids, and they know it. How does our government, by the way, Sweden just ruled when they were looking at forcing vaccines, they said our Constitution does not allow us to murder our own citizens, therefore we cannot have a forced vaccine program. It's that simple. Whether it's for the good of the whole or not, the Hippocratic Oath is to do no harm, not some harm, no harm. And yet we knowingly, every doctor will tell you, well, of course some kids will die, some will be injured, but that is the accepted casualty of herd immunity. Follow that question up with exactly how many people do we expect to die next year based on our numbers? Or how many children are going to have a neurological event that will damage them for life? I asked this of the CDC head in Washington. She looked at me and she said, Del, we don't have the data on that. I said, hold on a second. You just said it's an accepted casualty, and you don't know what casualty you're accepting? And you call that science? She's like, okay, I get your point. But it gets worse. It gets worse than 59,000 because when we said to them, we'd like to do studies on the VAERS system. We'd like to run data studies to see if we can figure out what's causing SIDS or sudden unexplained death or autism or seizures. And you know what they say? Well, you can't use VAERS because we don't trust it. What do you mean you don't trust the only surveillance system you have? They say because it's underreported. In fact, HHS did its own study of the system that they are in control of, and this is what they found. Fewer than 1% of adverse events are actually being reported. Doctors don't know about it, doctors are afraid to use it or don't want to take the time, so no one is reporting to this system. Another study by David A. Kessler found the same thing. A fraction of the amount of injuries are being reported to VAERS. What does that mean? I mean, does that mean if we're to go by HHS's own statement, 59,000 injuries becomes 5.9 million injuries in the year of 2016. 432 deaths could be 43,000 deaths. And 10,000 emergency room visits becomes 1 million emergency room visits. I'm not making this claim. HHS is essentially making this claim. Why does no one care about this? And when we think to ourselves, well, certainly if it's underreported, we live in the United States of America. We have Google, we have Apple, we have Microsoft. I mean, certainly someone can build a system to automate when someone comes in with an injury that it just immediately goes into the computer system so we can start collecting data in the modern age and get to the bottom of the autoimmune disease crisis. What is causing it? Makes sense. I didn't think of that though. I wish I had, but the CDC did. In fact, in 2010, they hired the Harvard medical team to look into automating VAERS. Could you automate VAERS? And what they said is, why don't you use your own insurance plan, the Harvard Pilgrim Insurance Plan, and see if you can automate your VAERS system inside of that. So they did. And here's what they found out. The preliminary data were collected from June 2006 to 2009 on 715,000 patients. 1.4 million doses were given. 376,000 individuals got vaccines, and of these, there was 35,000 possible reactions. 376,000 individuals, 35,000 possible reactions. That's not 1 in a million. That's 1 in 10. That's shocking. Nobody who would buy a product that injures 1 in 10. How many people would spin a revolver with 1 deadly bullet or 1 life-changing bullet and put it on your child's head? You wouldn't do it. No one's told you this. So when they saw this, did the CDC say, fantastic, great, we can finally really modernize here and get to the bottom of this issue. Let's bring it online and get the whole country lined up and VAERS, let's automate it nationwide? No, look what they say at the end of this study. Unfortunately, there was never an opportunity to perform systems performance assessments because the necessary CDC contacts were no longer available, and the CDC consultants responsible for receiving data were no longer responsive to our multiple requests to proceed with testing and evaluation. They stopped answering the phone. They stopped answering their emails. They said, oh, hell no, we can't go in this direction. Let's shut this down immediately. And so the CDC wasted $1 million of taxpayer money simply because, once again, they saw something they didn't like. This is my favorite part of this whole thing, in a very dark, I guess, sort of cynical type of way. The Institute of Medicine is the brain trust of American science that are not working for our government. They may have previously worked for the CDC or something, but now they're in private practice, Nobel laureates. So they sit on this panel, and every once in a while the CDC will ask them to review or investigate a question that they might have outside of the government agency. So in 1991, the CDC asked the Institute of Medicine to look at the DTP vaccine. This one is killing children in Africa and caused our vaccine injury compensation program. They said, look at the 22 conditions that are most commonly referred to by parents after getting this vaccine. And they did. And what they found was the literature supports causation for 6 of them. 6 of the 22 definitely caused by the vaccine. 4 definitely not caused by the vaccine. We've looked at all the literature and science around the world. But look at this number right here, 12. 12 of the 22, more than half, There is no science that exists. We have no idea if the vaccine is causing aseptic meningitis, chronic neurological damage, learning disabilities, attention deficit disorder, juvenile diabetes, Guillain-Barré syndrome, peripheral mononeuropathy. These horrific events, the IOM says, we're flying blind, folks. We have no idea if the vaccine is causing this, and no one's doing any science to look into it. And so what did they say? They said, please, if research capacity and accomplishment in this field are not improved, future reviews of vaccine safety will be similarly handicapped. Basically, CDC, do your job. Children in harm's way, and this is scary. Did the CDC clean up their act? In 1994, the IOM's asked to look at 4 more vaccines, DT, MM, Hep B, and Hib. Now we have 54 common injuries being reported. Once again, the literature supported causation for 12, rejected 4. Look at that number. Of 54, 38 the CDC, HHS, FDA, not a clue. We have no idea if our vaccine is causing demyelinating diseases of the central nervous system, sterility, arthritis, neuropathy, residual seizure disorder. I was thinking the other day, did anyone see that Clive Owen movie where there's like one woman alive that's pregnant and he's got to like try and get her to escape? It's like this futuristic movie and you think, oh, that's like, how would that happen? It would happen if we're injecting products into us citizens and no one's testing the safety. Nobody cares that we're seeing sterility and issues like that. Okay? And again, they rebuked the CDC, saying the lack of adequate data regarding many of the adverse events under study was of major concern to this committee. The IOM report somberly states it regrets this uncertainty and urges that more definitive research be done immediately. Did they do it? 2011. Once again, 4 more vaccines, varicella, tetanus, Hep B, MMR. Now we have 155 common reported injuries. Literature supports 16, rejects 5. 134 injuries. We don't have a clue, folks. We just don't know. And they're the same. Encephalitis, encephalopathy, transverse myelitis, these were all on the one all the way back in 96. They have never taken this list after IOM says we have no idea. They never went and did a study saying we better look at Guillain-Barré syndrome and transverse myelitis because if we're causing paralysis, certainly there's a way to fix this vaccine to make it better. They didn't care. Not for a decade. They have never done the studies. Yet they're telling you, don't worry about it. Vaccines are safe and effective, and we're extensively looking into this. Autism. A lot of people tell me, Del, just get off of autism. We've lost the sort of battle around that word. There's so many other injuries caused by vaccines. Just focus there. It's a good point. Except that autism, as of I think it was about a month ago, has just now upticked one more time. 1 in 36 children in America is now being diagnosed with autism. And forget about these ads where they show these kids healing and or that they're really just kind of quirky and they go off to college. That's a small percentage and good for them. But there are parents all over this country that cannot come into rooms like this, cannot go out in public because they're in prison with a child that cannot go out and function in society. Millions of them, and growing by the millions. What is the future of your child right now going to be? Taking care of 1 in 36? Or, if you've seen Vaxxed, you know that mathematically, if it continues on the current surge, we will be diagnosing 1 in 2 children with autism by 2032. That's the end of a society, folks. That's the end of a standing army. It's the end of your insurance system, which is already crumbling under the weight and the cost of autism. But let's look at autism just for one moment here because the Institute of Medicine did. In 2011, they were asked, will you look at the DTaP vaccine and the Tdap, so our diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis vaccines, both childhood and adult, and see parents are saying that their child's autism was caused by that vaccine. So they investigated. Institute of Medicine looked into it. On the bottom, you will see it says, the evidence, this is their conclusion, the evidence is inadequate to accept or reject a causal relationship between diphtheria toxoid, tetanus toxoid, or acellular pertussis containing vaccines and autism. Same as the other 134 out of 155. No science exists looking at DTaP. What? No science? Sanjay Gupta told me they've looked at the entire vaccine program extensively, but the Institute of Medicine is telling me no science has looked at just one of the vaccines, DTaP, when asked to look at it. What's fascinating too is if you look at the top paragraph, there was actually one study they found investigating DTaP vaccine and autism. It was called the Geyer and Geyer study, and look what it says. The committee reviewed one study to evaluate the risk of autism after the administration of DTaP vaccine. The one study was not considered in the weight of epidemiologic evidence because it provided data from a passive surveillance system, our VAERS system, which we don't trust, and this is beautiful, and lacked an unvaccinated comparison population. We're not going to trust it because it's not a vax versus unvax study. And by the way, we refuse to do a vax versus unvax study. Okay? So there it is. DTaP vaccine, we don't know. Could be causing autism, just as likely that it causes autism, that it doesn't cause autism because no science exists. Now, when you get a vaccine, you get the little VIS sheet that tells you maybe some swelling in the arm. It says for further information, go to this CDC website. And when you do, this is the first page that comes up. Vaccines do not cause autism. This is what they think is the most important thing you know when you're looking into what type of harm the vaccine could potentially cause your child. Vaccines do not cause autism is the first thing they want to tell you. And what do they cite as the background for this incredible statement? The 2011 study that only looked at the DTaP and determined we can neither determine yes or no whether it causes autism. This is a total sham. Your government is lying to the people every day they go to this website because not only do we not know about the DTaP, and therefore how do you get to vaccines plural? I mean, if you've seen vax, you know the MMR vaccine study was a fraud, but you could say, if you're going to stand behind your fraud, MMR does not cause autism. But you cannot say vaccines do not cause autism, because you've never looked at vaccines. In fact, of all of the 16 vaccines our children receive, only one has ever been through an actual study taking autistic children and a group that got the vaccine and comparing what happened and how it went down. Only one of 16 vaccines. So Sanjay Gupta, you are lying to the world. And I hate to keep picking on him. I dug him, I had him on the doctors, I've had him as guests, but how can you keep repeating this nonsense when it's just simply not true? In what world is one of 16 vaccines an extensive investigation? And in what world of the 50 toxic, ingredients in the vaccines, only one has ever been studied looking at autism, and that's thimerosal, the mercury-containing preservative. All the rest of these, from aborted fetal tissue, which there are really credible reasons why having fragments of DNA in your, from a dead baby going into your healthy baby could be causing issues like autism. And, you got mercury, aluminum, formaldehyde, polysorbate 80, and the list just goes on and on. None of them have ever been through a test. Nobody's testing it. Because what did Thompson say? We don't want to find out we have a problem. Your entire scientific community that's leading the world, every doctor's going to the CDC website and believing what they're being told. I'm not saying this is a conspiracy amongst doctors. The doctors are being lied to like the rest of us by this insanity. But don't take my word for it. I'm just a medical researcher. I'm just a journalist. This is Bernadine Healy, who was the head of the National Institute of Health. They get the most amount of funding from our government for health. The National Institute of Health is our top brain trust of science and medicine, and she was the head of it, and this is what she had to say.
This is the time when we do have the opportunity to understand whether or not there are susceptible children, perhaps genetically, perhaps they have a metabolic issue, mitochondrial disorder, immunological issue, that makes them more susceptible to vaccines, plural, or to one particular vaccine, or to a component of vaccine, like mercury. The fact that there is concern that you don't want to know that susceptible group is a real disappointment to me. If you know that susceptible group, you can save those children. The reason why they didn't want to look for those susceptibility groups was because they're afraid that if they found them, however big or small they were, that would scare the public away.
It sounds like you don't think the hypothesis of a link between vaccines and autism is completely irrational.
So when I first heard about it, I thought, well, that doesn't make sense to me. the more you delve into it, if you look at the basic science, if you look at the research that's been done in animals, if you also look at some of these individual cases, and if you look at the evidence that there is no link, what I come away with is the question has not been answered.
Did you ever hear that? Head of the National Institute of Health, the question has not been answered. We've buried this. And autism is skyrocketing. Autoimmune disease is skyrocketing. Our children are so sick. And yet we're worried about measles. Somebody recently was attacking me on Facebook and said, well, even if it's true that vaccines cause autism, it's better than the diseases that you're protected against. Can you imagine making that statement? How many people in this room had measles as kids? Okay. Was that as bad as neurological damage for life, can't go to school, wearing diapers into adulthood? I don't think so. It's an unbelievably insane statement, but that's the type of thinking. Or how many people have heard, autism's always been here, we're just diagnosing it better? Have you heard that line? Has anyone run their brain through that for 2 seconds instead of just repeating it and thought, okay, where were the autistic kids in my classroom? It didn't mean they would have disappeared. They would have been there. They would have been flapping and repetitive motions and having trouble in class. But they probably wouldn't have been in school because we wouldn't know how to handle them in school. So I don't remember a single friend I went home to that had a brother or a sister in a room somewhere being kept at home. Or how about this idea? How about the greatest investigative medical minds of our time? Don't live in this time. Lived a century or two ago. Charcot, Tourette's, Freud. What did these guys do? These guys went to insane asylums all over the world. They were passionate about diagnosing maladies and writing down every description of it. They couldn't fix it. They couldn't heal it. That would come a century later. But they looked into it. And we can't find a single record of a description of autism. Not one. If autism's always been here, and if you hear a scientist say that, you have to seriously question what is going on here. It flies in the face of reality. Where are we at? So what does she talk about? She talks about susceptible groups. We know some children are being injured. Some will die. Why are they having allergic reactions? Why do some get autism and others don't? Why do some have seizures and others don't? Why do some babies die all of a sudden and others don't? If we investigated that, we might find the answers. Here's the Institute of Medicine looking at a few of the things we've talked about. They did a search of allergy, asthma, autoimmunity, autism, neurological disorders, on and on. And what they found is no studies have compared the differences in health outcomes between entirely unimmunized populations of children and fully immunized children. So if anyone tells you we've done the vax versus unvax study, it has not happened. Institute of Medicine says it right here. We've never done it. We've never done the most obvious study known to man. And it goes on further. How many people have heard, Bob Sears or these doctors that spread the schedule out and they say that they're dangerous, they're quacks, they're using an unproven vaccine program for children? Look what the Institute of Medicine has to say about the CDC's own vaccine schedule. Furthermore, studies designed to examine the long-term effects of the cumulative number of vaccines or other aspects of the immunization schedule have not been conducted. They have never done a study of 4 vaccines being given to your baby at one time. They have never done a study of 72 vaccines in your children by 18, ever. Institute of Medicine said it, I didn't. You see where we're going here? Why am I the only journalist talking about this? What is happening? And what issue do we have in this nation that is bigger than this? What other product is being forced into you? We're on the cusp of living in a country that won't let you on a plane until you get these untested vaccines. You won't be allowed in open spaces. They're starting with our kids. Now you're seeing nurses are having to get vaccinated. Never needed it before. No one was dying because a nurse gave them the flu. But now all of a sudden, nurses and healthcare workers and child care workers. This is the beginning of a forced injection program. Take the word vaccination out of it for a moment. Can you imagine 10 years ago if I told you we're about to live in a country where they're going to line American citizens up at least once a year and force inject you with unknown products? That's what you're signing off on. Every politician that you don't keep in check, that you let pass mandatory vaccine laws, that's where this is going. You are going to be lined up. And what did we see? Gates Foundation had a vaccine program, a diphtheria tetanus program in Africa. They smuggled out the two or three different groups, grabbed the vaccines because something peculiar was happening, and they ran out of the country. The vaccines were showing up under armed guards, being used in these villages and then taken away under armed guards. And someone says, something's weird there. So they grabbed them and ran them to labs. 2 different labs reported that those vaccines were sterilizing girls in Africa. So what happens when you have a mandatory vaccine program and you decide, all of a sudden we start hearing, geez, everyone in Compton or Watts or somewhere in the poorer side of town in Mississippi, they're just having trouble having babies and we don't know why. I'm not saying that's how this program is being used. I'm saying that's how this program could be used. And what intelligent society doesn't reflect on Hitler and Nazi Germany? What have we heard? If you forget your past, you're doomed to repeat it. At what point do we wake up and say, this is scary times, folks? Why is all this important? Well, because look at the same time the vaccines are increasing, which is the red dots, and then the autoimmune disease is going up right alongside of it. CDC's vaccine safety data link, this is what we asked them to do. We said, you have a data link that has 10 million individuals in it. It's kept up to date every year. The entire life health outcomes and reports from these people is in there. We simply want you to run the unvaccinated children against the fully vaccinated children in a comparative study. Run the health outcomes. What are the rates of cancer, autoimmune disease, multiple sclerosis, on and on and on. And you know what they said? We can't figure out how to do that study. That's what they said. Tony Fauci and Francis Collins looked us in the eyes and said, the brain trust of World Health cannot figure out how to compare unvaccinated kids to vaccinated kids. There you go. So it's unethical to do a pre-licensing study, and we are incapable of figuring out how to do a post-licensing study. And that's where we're at. Unfortunately for them, the IOM looked into this in 2011. What do they say? It is possible to make this comparison between vaccinated versus unvaccinated children through analysis of patient information contained in large databases such as the VSD. So they're just refusing. This was a vax versus unvax study. 10-fold increase in death by the vaccine. There was another vax versus unvax study that came out last year. This is the Mawson study. It looked at 640 homeschool kids. I think it was 640, over 600. And it asked essentially questions of the vaccination programs and the health programs for the parents that were homeschooling. And what they discovered was the vaccinated children did have lower rates of measles, did have lower rates of chickenpox. So nobody was lying. They admitted, yeah, my kid got measles and chickenpox because they were unvaccinated. But the vaccinated kids had 30 times the amount of allergic rhinitis, had 3.9 times the amount of allergy, had 4 times the amount of ADHD, had 4 times the amount of autism, had 3 times the amount of eczema, 5 times the amount of learning disabilities, and almost 4 times the amount of neurological disorders. Is this a small study? They say, well, it's a small study. Fine. Do your own. Do your own on the 10 million kids and stop beating around the bush, because this is what we are seeing. This is what we are seeing in our classrooms. This is what we're seeing in our Sunday schools. This is what we're seeing in our homes. Our kids are sick, and you keep telling us it's not the vaccine. Then what is it?
My name is Robbie Bazell, and my daughter Skylar was a perfectly healthy baby that was walking at 10 months old. We could not get her into daycare without her 1-year vaccination shots. My mom said she was told in 1986 at my shots for my 1-year MMR that the doctor told her not to give me it because of the history of seizures in our family. We have a higher chance of brain damage, death, seizures, etc. from the MMR compared to an average person. But in 2016, for my daughter, when Skylar's mom and I asked, we were told they were perfectly safe for Skylar and to not worry. Through research, I found out that there's 2 dead aborted fetus DNAs in the MMR, and it's never had a placebo study done to ever test the safety of injecting dead children into other humans. You know, I believe in Jesus Christ, and all Christians know he would not want dead children's DNAs. Children that were murdered in his eyes, injected into other humans, forced injected at that. I didn't want her to get the shots, but we were forced to because my daughter was being denied the same education as every other child in this country. Skylar had her 1-year health and wellness check the same day she received her 1-year vaccination shot. She was normal on everything according to the wellness check from that day. She was perfectly healthy, baby girl. She received her MMR, Hep A 2 dose, and PCV 13 to get into school. And the following day, she had 104.9 fever and had her first seizure. She was hospitalized 3 days later and had an EEG done that showed she had 130 seizures in 30 minutes, and they cut the study short. A few days later, Dr. Callahan, Skylar, Mom, and I went in to see him, and he said by the age of 2, she would have hour-long grand mal seizures, and by 3, she has a high chance of dying in her sleep, and that we need to prepare for that. He didn't anticipate medicines working for her. They would only make her worse, but he said we have to try something and not just let her die. They tried close to 10 pharmaceuticals now, and none worked. Each one caused more and different types of seizures, and they said she has a 30% chance of dying in her sleep if we do not get her seizures under control. Now, it's been 2.5 years, and Skylar is still having thousands of seizures a day. She has had close to 6 million seizures in 2.5 years, and nothing has worked to stop them. And every night I put her down, there is a 1 in 3 chance I will wake up with my child dead laying next to me. I trusted my pediatrician and doctor when I knew my faith and spirit told me to not give her the shots, and now I pray to God that he forgives me for trusting the medical field over him, and I pray he heals my daughter to protect her because I can't. And as a father and as a parent, I wouldn't wish this feeling upon no one because it hurts my soul, not being able to protect my child. No one can help her, no doctor, and no medicine. Christ is the only one that can protect her at this point with a miracle, and I'm depending on Jesus to heal her vax injury, the same person that was denied in the beginning, my religious freedom, which would have protected my child. Now, I would have brought Skylar down there to meet everybody for this hearing to show, what is being mandated in schools and what has been mandated on my child and in my family. But I already booked a trip to take her to Disney World. I don't know how much longer my daughter has to live. So I wanted to get her to Disney to meet Minnie and Mickey and Ella and Belle and Jasmine and the rest of the princesses. She knows all the names. She's been schooling me lately, so I'm getting better at that. So she's excited. And I thank you nice ladies and gentlemen of the Missouri Congress for the opportunity to share, what mandating vaccines is doing as far as mandating death and brain damage to a percentage of healthy babies. And also for giving my freedom of speech back that has been denied on Facebook. Now imagine Skylar is your family member, your son, your daughter, that is 6,000 seizures a day mandated on them, and you lose your freedom of speech on top of it. I know you all can't do anything to bring Skylar back or to give her the opportunity of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness like all Americans are promised, but you can make sure that not another Missourian is never forced into what my family was to, just to give my daughter the same education as other kids are receiving. My family was denied trusting what God was telling me was right. Something that we all know once there's 2 dead children into 1 shot. My religious freedom's been stripped, and now my daughter's days are numbered because I was denied our right as a U.S. citizen and as our right as a human being. When I became a father, I vowed to change as a person and to give my daughter the best life I could. I promised her to protect her against anything in this world, and I failed. I failed because I trusted doctors, which is sad because that's 100% accurate. I'm speaking today to show what mandating vaccines will do. I'm doing this to educate the truth for all those who want to receive it in the name and by the blood of Jesus Christ. I did this not to be called anti-vax that all parents like me are labeled as. Families like mine lose healthy children and are mocked publicly and censored on social media for sharing their child's injury. If on Facebook pedophiles or people too can speak out about their rights after molesting or raping a child, surely you would think I could talk about what happened to my daughter. But according to Facebook, that answer is clearly no.